We need to be scared for the Dallas Mavericks. Despite being one of the best teams in the league and the reigning Western Conference champions, they have lost their last three and are decimated with injuries, as Luka will be out for another month, and Kyrie, PJ, and Lively have missed times within the last couple weeks. They're quickly fading in a very tough West, look lackluster without Luka, and have an extremely tough schedule over the next couple weeks. So can Dallas withstand this next stretch? And just how bad is Dallas' situation over the next month? Well, Luka Doncic was injured on Christmas, and a couple days later he was ruled out for the next month, before he will be reevaluated with a left calf strain, and we can expect a return in about a month from now. He's an MVP level guy. Y'all know how good Luka is. He's undoubtedly a top 5 player and top 2 offensive engine, a triple-double threat at all times, and has been transforming his playstyle to be more off-ball and better defensively, while still kind of putting up great stats. Something a lot of fans, including probably y'all, have been requesting for the last few years. PJ Washington, a key 3-and-D player who's very important defensively and a big POA guy who's big enough to help protect the rim, has also missed time. Kyrie, though now healthy, has also missed 4 games, where Dallas went 1-3 in those games. And Derek Lively has been banged up, having multiple stretches of missing games where the Mavs went 3-5. And Lively missing time is really bad, considering just how rough the Mavs bigs have been this year, with Gafford and Maxey taking huge steps back, but we'll talk more about that later. Dante Exum has also missed the whole season, who was a key contributor at least in the regular season last year, and Clay and Najee have both missed a handful of games, and their upcoming schedule is what is really scary for Dallas and how they will fare for when Luka returns and if they can recover. The Mavericks' schedule for the next few weeks is the Cavs, Grizzlies, Lakers, Blazers, Nuggets twice, Pels, Thunder, Hornets, Timberwolves, Thunder again, and the Celtics. That includes the top 2 teams record-wise in both conferences, and 9 of the 12 teams have a winning record with a combined record of 227 and 164, a winning percentage of 58.1%. And remember, they do have to do all of this without their best player in Luka Doncic. But just how close are they to falling in the West? Well, they kind of already have, and by the time you see this, I'm sure they fell more. Yet they already fell back from the 3rd seed just a couple weeks ago to now 5th, even below the Denver Nuggets. And with how tight the West is, it really isn't impossible that they completely fall out of the play-in. The 7-seeded Lakers are just a game back. The 9-seeded Spurs are 2.5, and the 11-seeded Suns are 4. If Luka were to come back exactly a month after his injury, which he could come back later considering on January 27th and 29th, Dallas plays Washington and New Orleans, the 2 worst teams in the league at least record-wise, but the Mavs would probably go around 4-8 to 5-7, which kinda is, generous in that 12-game stretch. And the likely outcome would be Dallas landing at around the 8 to 10 seed. And they can come back from that. They are a really good team when healthy, but they're already getting much worse, and especially over the last few games without Luka. Luka went down in a Christmas Day game against the Minnesota Timberwolves, and though they did launch a comeback in the 4th, it fell short despite Kyrie's 39, and we didn't really know how bad Doncic's injury was at the time. The Mavs would win against the Suns, who were also on a cold stretch, even worse than Dallas's, but the next game would be devastating. The Mavs again launched a comeback in the 4th, this time against an 11-20 Blazers squad, as they were somehow trailing by 17 to enter the last quarter. And again, Kyrie dropped 20 in the 4th and 46 across the whole game, but it just wasn't enough to win. This fake comeback team is kind of annoying to root for. In the next game, Dallas took a very early lead, even leading by 14 at the end of the first against Sacramento, despite missing Luka, Kyrie, Lively, and Najee. But Sacramento again stormed back, and even though they are with a new head coach, had lost 6 games before this and looked like one of the worst teams in the league on their way to kind of a for sure tank and rebuild, they still won and came back. Kyrie would return in the next game, and again the Mavs took an early lead and even led by 11 halfway through the first, but again they could not close out the game. And this isn't all to fault the roster or coach Jason Kidd, but missing Luka will do that to a team. This year, the Mavs are 8.1 points per 100 possessions better when Luka's on the court than off, which is the highest among all Mavs guards. Without Luka, they just aren't the same, and that shows flaws in this roster, with Lively and Gafford being less effective, having to promote a struggling Dinwiddie and less quality shots for wings, like Clay and PJ. But enough with all this negative stuff and the struggles right now. What are we actually missing out on, and could this team contend if they do end up getting healthy? The answer is yes, and it's very clear, but let me explain. Before the Christmas Day game, the Mavs were 4th in the West, just a game back of the 2 seed, 19-10, and on pace for 54 wins, which was the most since their 2011 championship season. Yet even with Luka, this team hasn't been a great regular season squad. And while Luka wasn't averaging the best stats and had came out cold to start the season shooting-wise and had missed time, he was picking it up at the end. And like mentioned earlier, he was actually thriving off ball and giving more ball handling responsibilities to players like Kyrie, but in a beneficial way, and was having by far the best defensive season of his career after a cold first couple of weeks, coming off a playoff run in which he played above average defense for the first 3 rounds. Co-star Kyrie Irving is playing at an all-star level, and even enough for a bit of all-NBA considerations. In the first short stretch of Luka being out, Kyrie carried this team to the Mavs being solid, and he's shooting an insane 44.1% from deep. Klay Thompson has also translated very well to the Mavs, especially with Luka's on-ball playmaking, and can help some absolute heaters, while being a solid secondary defender. PJ Washington is also a very good 3-and-D guy like talked about, but adding Quentin Grimes and Najee Marshall over THJ and Derrick Jones Jr. is huge, as they are very much better replacements, especially in Grimes over Tim Hardaway Jr., but the bigs have struggled heavily this year. Dereck Lively's progress has stagnated, especially struggling without Luka. Daniel Gafford has just been terrible on both sides of the ball and really bad on defense, while backup Maxi Kleber has lost pretty much all shooting touch and turned it into a really big negative on defense. What was great last year for the Mavs has turned into a huge flaw, but overall the roster construction is very good. Before the Luka injury, the 19-10 Mavs were 4th in offensive rating and just outside of the top 10 in defensive rating. Their net rating was 7th, only behind OKC, Cleveland, Boston, Memphis, New York, and Houston, and they also ranked top 5 in points per game. But ever since the absence of Luka on Christmas, Dallas is 25th in offensive rating and 21st in net rating. The Mavs lineup of Luka, Kyrie, Clay, PJ, Lively is the 3rd best lineup among lineups with 10 or more games played, and at the peak of their powers, they can go toe-to-toe with anybody. Luka turns into a different player in the playoffs, and we saw a very similar West team win the conference last year, though they did slightly improve over the offseason. Can they compete for a title? Yes, but some changes do need to be made. Having Maxi Kleber in the rotation just is not working. He has been that bad. The bigs of Lively and Gafford need to be better to compete, and a regression like this is a complete outlier, so I would expect them to get better throughout the season, and especially once Luka returns. Nico Harrison, the head of the Mavs front office, has virtually made this new team around Luka. Will also likely be active at the deadline. Dallas has been rumored around many trade candidates like Herb Jones and Kyle Kuzma, and though it may not be one of those players specifically, they are going to trade for a real impact player. They did it in 2023 with Kyrie and last year with PJ and Gaff. He has historically been aggressive, and even more so at the deadline, and it would be a shock that if a flawed Mavs team wouldn't make a move. Now Dallas does need to survive the stretch, staying a top 8 to 9 seed, and only a couple games back of the top 6 while staying healthy, but don't give up complete faith in the Mavs yet.